Hey everybody, it's Ben here, Pastor Joel. Today is Conversations, episode 1, and we're going to talk about worship and what does worship mean, what does that look like, and what does that look like now during Corona and during the times that we can't be together and we can't come to church and we can't come to the building and worship together. And yeah, so let's just dive in, Pastor Joel.
Yeah, this has been a big question in my heart because as a pastor, when all the shutdowns begin to happen, I begin to think, well, what does church look like streaming it online? And for some churches, they're able to stream their whole service. They got their band on the stage, and basically they're doing everything that they would do in church, and it's just going live on the internet. And we're a little lower tech here, so we're struggling. How do we create a worship experience for people online? But one of the things I then began to discover is, because you put together some music videos for us. That was awesome, so cool. But, well, what's it like for the viewers sitting in their living room?
Yeah.
It's a little strange, a little different. And it got me thinking, that might be an area of struggle for people is I'm missing being able to worship God, but maybe there's some things that we could learn, we could tap into to be able to worship God during this season. And maybe something really useful and healthy that comes out of this is we discover something fresh about worship.
Yeah.
And maybe a good place to start would be to ask the question, well, what do we mean by worship? What does that mean to you, for example?
Yeah. To me, when I think about worship, one of the main things that I'm reminded of is one of the first sort of lessons that God really worked me through and led me through, and that was really a perspective shift and his perspective change on the way that I looked at worship, the way I viewed worship, and I think for a long time in my head it was really just confined to forms of art, singing and music and dancing and painting and those kinds of things. And it was very, very much put in a box. And I think one of the main things that God kind of did for me during that time was really open my eyes to what worship really is. And to me, that is a lifestyle. And I think, like, we say that a lot, and a lot of times I don't know if we really necessarily unpack that as much as maybe we should. And one of the main perspective shifts that I think happened was I really began to look at what does worship mean scripturally, and what does that look like in the Bible, and what does that concept mean, and what I began to find was that essentially it was bringing glory back to God and giving him glory back.
Oh yeah.
And so
that's good.
The way that I began to find that I was able to do that was living from a place of reverence and living from where my heart is postured in such a way that it is consistently humble and consistently reverent to God, who he is. And I think that what that looks like is really like, what am I saying? What am I doing? What am I thinking? And are those things giving glory back to God? Are those things pointing back to him? Is the way that I'm living my life pointing back to him? Is the way that I talk to fellow believers and non-Christians, is that pointing to Christ? Is that showing what he's done for me in my life? Is that revealing his character and who he is? And I think once I started to do that, and that started to happen, my perspective on worship became not just on Sunday mornings and not just in a musical setting, but it started to bleed into my work. It started to bleed into when I was going to college and classrooms with classmates, and it started to bleed into relationships.
Good, yeah.
and the way that I started to interact with my family, and it really started to just change and shape what my relationship became and still is becoming with Christ.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I think there's a lot of myths, and you touched on a number of those that people, I think, believe about worship. That it's, you got to be on a platform, or it's something that's done on a stage. And maybe a way we can look at this is worship unstage, unscripted. Because a lot of what we do on a Sunday morning is really scripted, right? We select songs. I mean, because if you don't script it, it's chaos.
Yeah.
You gotta script a little bit. You gotta, practice your instruments. You gotta, you can't just get up there and start wailing on drums, right? You gotta have to have a plan.
Well, some people do.
But I think we have like we have this script that we act out. And necessary as that is, but maybe it's created this one-dimensional view of what worship is. And so maybe even people in the auditorium or in our audience, they're just like, well, I can't do that. I don't play a guitar, I don't play an instrument. I'm not really comfortable singing. I don't really have a voice for that. And don't realize how they can connect with God. I think that's one of the things that we're discovering now is that worship is larger than just what's on the stage. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of times we associate the presence of God with the worship leader. And I think that was one thing that I was talking with Molly Joe about just before I came over today, and we were talking about how a lot of times we'll go to a church service or a worship service, and the worship leader's leading worship and he plays songs, and we don't feel it, and we don't feel the presence of God necessarily. And I was just kind of reminded, because that was one thing that God really kind of helped me work through, because that was a struggle of mine for a long time, where I would play worship or do worship for a church or something, and it would just be dead. And I was like, okay, did I do something wrong? Did I not pray enough this week? Did I, you know what I mean? And I think one of the main things that God really kind of led me through is that His presence is not dependent on one person, and that I think if we were to all get on the same page as far as worship being a lifestyle, and we had that mentality, and that's the way we walk through life and operate it from that place of reverence, then when we come together as one body, it's the worship leader is almost not even needed, because when two or three come together, His presence is there.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how well one person sings, it doesn't matter how well one person plays, the only thing that matters is the heart of the people, the congregation, the church. And I think when I looked at the Bible, that's the main theme. That's the thing that keeps getting repeated over and over again is your heart. Your heart. He wants your heart. He wants my heart. He wants us to be of one accord and one heart, to be after Him and in pursuit of Him. And I think that was one myth that is really kind of, I think, in a lot of modern American church, is that the presence of God, or some people might even say anointing, is always dependent on the worship leader, and how anointed they are, or how anointed their voice is, or how anointed they can play, And I think that's one thing that I think if there's anything that I can offer is that perspective shift or change.
Yeah. One of the things that I was blessed was to be in a church that had a very, very gifted worship leader for a number of years. And one of the things we learned in that season was just how easy it is for us to become really fixated on, like Ben was saying, on that worship leader and on his skills. And what people began to do, I think, Ben, was we kind of coasted along. We weren't really worshiping God. We were moving in the music, but not necessarily in the spirit. To the point where, if the music is really good, it's like you can just kind of coast along, and music has a way of moving us. And when we feel moved, sometimes we say, well, that's the anointing, that's God. But no, maybe it's just the music. and we made it really about that person. When that person moved away and was gone, then it really left a void. It was like, wow, what do we do now? And it was in that moment that we really learned that worship is something that comes from our heart. Mm-hmm. That we were either going to do or we're not going to do. And it's very easy to get fixated on the person.
Yeah.
On the stage, on the music.
Yeah, and I think it's just human nature to sort of lean and drift towards those things because I think in all honesty it makes it easier. Mm-hmm. And it's the sort of comfortable place where we don't really have to, I guess, engage, and we can just sort of place our hand out and hope to be led to the presence of God. And there is, worship, that is the place of a worship leader, but at the same time, I think music as well as the anointing, I think, is not the end place. It's not the place that the destination. It's more or less, to me, the boost, the starting place.
It's like a tool.
The jumping pad where it's like, it's what launches us into the presence of God, but it's not the presence of God. And I think we get that confused quite often.
Yeah, it really is easy, I think, to make it all about the music, all about what happens in a church service. So one of the things that I began to discover, like you did, you had this discovery that worship is a lifestyle. One of the things that I've just really been challenged with as far as making worship a lifestyle has been, well, what if my choices to do what God would have me to do in this given situation or given this circumstance, what if I looked at that not as like a religious obligation, right? But what if I looked at doing the right thing in this situation? What if I saw that in a whole new light, a fresh light, like this is an act of worship? To do this I'm going to do this, God, but I want you to receive it as an act of worship, not as an act of I've got to do this to please you or to gain favor with you. You boost my credibility in heaven. Yeah.
Add some jewels to your crown.
Get some street cred on those streets of gold, right? But what if I looked at that as just an expression of worship? Mm-hmm. And so simple things, they're going to sound really stupid, but like stopping at a stop sign or going the speed limit when I'm the only one on the highway. Yeah, exactly. But doing that just because, God, I want you to receive this as an act of worship. I'm doing what's right in your sight because I know you see me all the time. And I just want you to receive that as an act of devotion to you. You're worthy of that. Yeah. And so I'm finding there's just lots of ways that we can worship God. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be confined to a church building. Something else I was thinking about with worship, consider this is whenever I go out in the mountains or when I'm walking here in town, one of the things I really like to do is I put praise and worship music on. I'll put my earbuds in and I'll have some praise and worship going. But it was in a season when I was doing this a lot in my last community. I was walking like 6 miles a day. And worshiping God to the point where some of those albums, I'll listen to a song and I can tell you where I was on that street corner or what section of town I'd be walking because I'd always hit the same neighborhood with the same song. Yeah. Kind of funny how that works out. But one of the things I discovered was just how interconnected worship, like in my mind at that time, worship was music. Mm-hmm. How interconnected that is with prayer. Right. And I think one of the things I discovered in that season is, to me, worship was discovering, or rediscovering, or reminding myself of who God is. Mm. Like when I really worship God, I'm reminded of who He is, and the more I can be reminded of who He is, the more He reminds me of who I am. Yeah. And that's a really life-giving. That's like a give. There's a give and a take there. Yeah. That's really life-giving, really dynamic, mm-hmm. And it's something that doesn't have to happen in a church service. In fact, should be happening in a lot more places in our life. Yeah. I've always looked at worship as like the difference between, I guess, corporate worship and like personal worship is like throughout the week, right? That's when we're worshiping on our own and we're personally like having our one-on-one time with God and like going on walks and having those moments and stuff. And like, it's
that's when relationship is taking place. That's when the deepening of relationship and intimacy is taking place, so that like when we come together as one body, it really is a celebration, which is, I think, what corporate worship on a Sunday morning is supposed to be.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be more of like a celebration of being able to come together, being able to worship God together, and sort of let what's been filling our cup all week overflow, you know. And I think that's kind of what I've really been trying to shift in the way I see things, and I think that's something that like God's working me through like right now too. And the other thing that I just kind of wanted to make a point was that I think, like I was talking about living from a place of reverence before, and how that is kind of the core sort of ideal or concept of what I think worship as lifestyle means. The thing about, I think, living in or from a place of reverence is that it's a choice. I think it's very important to understand that it's something that we have to choose to do, and we have to choose and make that choice consistently. And I think the other thing to like point out about that is it's really, really hard to like wake up every single day, and in every decision and every word and every thought continually choose to operate from that place of reverence. And which is why it's like, you know, Paul says we fall short of the glory of God on a daily basis, because it's like, it's extremely hard, you know, and I don't do that, I think, as well as maybe even I could or should, and it's a constant.
I think it's something though that the Holy Spirit helps us in that area of weakness.
Right.
It says the Spirit helps us in our weakness, and not just, you know, in knowing how to pray, but I think in knowing how to live that lifestyle of worship.
Yeah, and the choice, like, it gets easier over time, but you know, that's still not to say that it's still hard, and there's still tests, and there's still things that like we're gonna go through that are gonna happen that we have no control over. And I think when we operate from that place of reverence, that really has an influence on our reaction to what happens and the things that we can't control.
Yeah, and there's a lot of noise and distractions that can distract us from being able to have time with God, to worship Him. Whether it be, and for some people, their time of worship might not involve any kind of music whatsoever. It might just be going for a walk in the mountains, or spending some time out in nature, fishing.
Yeah.
Right. Wherever you can get away from the noise of the world, and maybe turn a focus and turn attention to our Creator, and talk to Jesus. Tell Him, thank you for what you've done in my life. I think that a lot of times our music that we do in here, it's like a Hallmark card that you get at a store. Somebody else wrote the message, you know, and you give it to someone, like, hey, I read this, and it's like, yeah, I agree with that. Here you go. You know, and but maybe our worship is more meaningful when we write our own card to God. Like, this is what I love about you. This is what I appreciate about you. And when we do that, and we tune out the noise of the world, turn our eyes on Jesus, something really powerful begins to happen. We begin to encounter the presence of God, and we find the presence of God isn't confined to a church building. So I think that's something really, really useful and good for all of us to begin to discover for ourselves during this season, is how do we have daily encounters with God, and what worship can look like. Yeah. Let's, as we kind of wrap this up here, what are some suggestions that you can offer to help guide people into that lifestyle of worship?
I mean, I think, like we say it all the time, but I mean, like, getting into your word and like understanding like what His written word is saying about worship, and I think that, I mean, for me, that was really the only thing that allowed that perspective shift to happen in me, was getting into the word and reading about David, and reading about, you know, his story and how he messed up like more than most people in the Bible, like, you know, but he still was called the man after God's own heart, and he really did live from that place of reverence and that
Yeah.
place of adoration and love for Christ. And so I think practical things that I've done and I do now is just, listening to sermons or watching worship videos or listening to different Christian media outlets that I trust and like and things. And it's kind of, I think too, also always, trying to have an open mind when listening to things and
Yeah.
being able to receive and always being teachable and always being bendable, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And not just, this is what I believe about worship and I'm never going to change. And I
Yeah,
think,
not shopping around for people to agree with me,
right,
but
willing
yeah.
to be challenged, I
Yeah.
think is a key thing, because like if you're in pursuit of a perspective shift or a mentality change, you have to be willing to be challenged, and you have to be willing to accept or receive something that you might not initially agree with. And I think that's pursuing perspective shift and mentality changes.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and what I would add to that is that it doesn't happen on its own. That worship is something that by its definition is going to require intentionality. But I have to be intentional about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I've just been doing this last year is spending much more time intentionally in the presence of God, taking advantage of the weather. Go out and I'll spend an hour to an hour and a half walking at the track, either listening to some message or spending time just in worship. Sometimes I'll just tune out the noise. I'll just put my earbuds in or something, just tune out the noise and just be quiet before God. Just walk. And or for some people, they might use their workout time to do that. But I think the big key is whatever you can do to tune out the noise and be able to quiet your spirit so that you can really commune with God is really good.
Yeah.
Yard work, running a mower out there, for some people that's just a chore. To me, that's also time for me to listen, to what is God saying, and use that opportunity to worship. Especially when you're outdoors, you see these mountains. It's like, man, what an incredible place to live. And so, just finding that time, making that time, and being intentional about that time, I think are really, really key.
Yeah. And then being open to change.
Yeah, being open to allow your box to be broadened.
Yeah.
And recognize sometimes that some people's musical form of worship is different than mine.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like my dad's style of worship is like, he would like pull out a song out of his head. Like, I'd never heard this song before in my life. And all of a sudden he'd just bust out in the middle of a service, and we'd be doing some Jesus culture, some Hillsong United, God's Moving, and all of a sudden Dad's singing some song nobody else has ever heard of. just the old people in the service. This is what I was thinking, just the old people in church. But recognizing it took some time for me to move out of that immaturity, and to recognize that for him was very worshipful. Yeah. And God was connecting with that. Yeah. And so don't, like you say, don't allow your idea of worship be squeezed into a really small package. Yeah. And I think we got to be really careful about critiquing, other people's worship, that their songs or their style might be different than what we particularly enjoy. Nevertheless, it's a heartfelt expression to God. It's meaningful. It's important to Him. I believe it's something that's really powerful.
For sure. Well, I think that concludes episode 1 of Conversations.
Yeah, this is good. Hopefully you got a good perspective and found this to be beneficial as we explore some other topics. Stay tuned. We'll be putting up more video content on YouTube and Facebook. And be willing to go out and use this time where we're outside the church to be the people of God, living, what did you say?
From a place of reverence.
Living from a place of reverence in our community. God bless you all. You have a wonderful day. We'll see you again next time.
I love you.